The next guest that I want to introduce you to, although many of you know her much better than I do, is to welcome Aunty Denise Champion to our midst. Aunty Denise is an internationally respected theologian and author and teacher and speaker and pastor. She's a daughter of the Adnyamathanha Nation, and she in 2015 she was the first South Australian Aboriginal woman to be ordained for ministry in the Uniting Church in Australia. I remember the celebrations, even though I wasn't part of the Uniting Church at that stage. For decades, she has been a key leader in the United Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, both with the South Australian Regional Council and the wider National Council of Congress, and has had pastoral ministries at Port Augusta and Corn and Salisbury North. Did that cover it? Good. And has, to the delight of many, and to the richness of the church, recently been appointed as theologian in residence at the Uniting Church, or the Uniting College of Leadership and Theology here in Adelaide. She is the author of several books, and I know I will do a disservice to the pronunciation of the names, but something like Yata Wandata, The Land is Speaking, The People Are Speaking, your first book, and more recently, just last year I think, Aunty, The Way Things Are. I believe copies of those books are going to be, they'll be available for purchase tomorrow, so you're all going to have to come back, even if you haven't registered. It's not too late to do so. Aunty Denise, a very warm welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us in response to Chris's presentation. Thank you.
Yanakane, Ngapralanga, Wimalanga, Ikanda. Yanakane, Ngapralanga, Wimalanga, Ikanda. Arawatana, God is here. Arawatana, God is here. I enact my sovereign right to speak and sing in my own language. In the first chapter of the book Dark Emu, for young readers, a child version of Dark Emu, an easy-to-read version by Bruce Pascoe, he encourages his readers to keep an open mind and gives an explanation of his writing, Dark Emu, as a different way of seeing. It is with Bruce Pascoe's word about seeing a different way, or having a different way of seeing, I too would like to make my response to Chris to invite you on a journey to a different way of seeing. And I want to begin by paying my respects to the Kaurna people, and I'd like to thank them for allowing me to speak on their land. I also want to pay my respects to my elders, the wisdom of my elders, one elder in particular who taught me about hidden wisdom and a hidden road, a different way of seeing. Kumana Lester, who recently passed away. and out of respect, I won't mention her name, but I will acknowledge her and address her and how her wisdom contributed to how I would like to respond to Chris tonight. She taught me a word, Jukurba Kumpulija, which means hidden road, hidden story, hidden road. And a lot of things that you have said tonight, Chris, have largely been hidden from the Australian population. The story, the narrative. Australia, as Chris has so well put it, was a single narrative that I grew up with. I grew up learning that Captain Cook was the first man who was in Australia. I didn't learn anything through this Western education about my people and about their story and their wealth of knowledge of our lands and the ways in which they survived for many thousands of years, and how they were able to and it flies, I guess, some of the things that I hear that, over the past years I reject, because I know full well that our people were a strong and proud people and always had a connection to country, to land, always had law, always an ordered society, and kept language and story and song, and danced ceremony on land, and that was their way of keeping the culture and the story strong. Chris, you made a statement in your paper, Sovereignty and Treaty. Sovereignty is about those who were here first and starting to negotiate a new way for us to occupy this land together. It raises many issues and questions, challenging assumptions and beliefs, and we heard much of that tonight. Maybe if we can name what the issues are for us, what we are curious about, what we want to know, we can have a more open conversation. You ask the question, how is First People sovereignty possible? Surely sovereignty rests with states and is about the exercise of absolute power by governments or parliament over certain territories, usually nation states. This is the view we hear when people talk about border control. We will decide who comes to this country. The Aboriginal voice, the Uluru Statement, will say that we have never ceded our sovereignty, in that we have always considered ourselves as sovereign peoples. Always was, Anarich, always was, always will be. Treaty, sovereignty and truth then, asking for what is already our sovereign right. I wish to enact my right as a sovereign person to speak my language. And ngai michi Denisana, ngai yura michi uchu warakana, ngai chu adyamatna yurati, ngai chu araru milyarana yurati. My name is Denise. My adyamatna name is Warakana, which means I'm the second born and female in my family, we had a very ordered and structured society. We had a birth order system, and many Aboriginal groups did. We had a birth order system of up to 10 people, and I am the second born and female in my family, and so my name is Warakana. And even if there was one of our family that was still born, they would still have been given their name and be remembered in their family. They were never ever forgotten. I follow after my mother's traditional ancestral line, the North Wind. I am a woman of the North Wind, and I come from a long line, 7 generations, back to the time before the tall ships and early explorers came. I want to affirm the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and the General Assembly stated that, guided by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and in good faith in the fulfilment of the obligations assured by the states in accordance with the Charter, we affirm. There are a couple of things that I wish to affirm tonight. Affirm that Indigenous peoples, and Chris, you said this in your address, that Indigenous peoples are equal to all other people, while recognising the right of all peoples to be different and to be respected as such. That's why I enact my right to speak my language, and I respect the rights of other Indigenous people to do the same, because we are still sovereign. We are a sovereign people. Also affirming also that all peoples contribute to the diversity and richness of civilisations and cultures which constitute the common heritage of humankind. It'd be a dull and boring world if we were all the same and looked the same and spoke the same. Our diversity adds to the richness, the diversity of our cultures adds to the richness of humanity. Affirming that all doctrines, policies and practices based on or advocating superiority of peoples or individuals on the basis of national origin or racial, religious, ethnic or cultural differences are racist, scientifically false, legally invalid, morally condemnable and socially unjust. Reaffirming that Indigenous people in the exercise of their rights should be free from discrimination of any kind. Articles 1 to 46, and I brought it up here. I always carry the declaration in my pocket. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the 46 articles in this declaration, which Australia, among other nations, have signed to and endorsed, protect the rights of Indigenous peoples. Mind you, Australia, Canada and America, Australia, New Zealand and Canada were the last 3 nations to sign the declaration. But now they have, we can hold them to their actions, and we can bring them back, which is what a treaty would do. when we went to Canada, I went with Chris to Canada with about 12 other people from Congress and the Uniting Church, and we looked at treaty truth and reconciliation and the actions that the Canadian United Church of Canada took. We already have other nations and other countries who have had to sit with their First Peoples and talk about treaty. What does it mean to have treaty? It is really important to have treaty for us as First Peoples. It's important to have treaty. It brings us as equals to the table. If we don't have that, we don't feel as if we're being treated as equals. Many of us have felt for a long time that we are refugees or in our own nation. We have nowhere else to go. This is our country, and we need to be able to find a way to live together with all others that come here. For Australia, many of these articles in this book, and there's about 46 articles, which are very useful, become a very useful instrument to be able to move forward in a way forward for treaty and truth and reconciliation. But in Australia, many of these have already been breached, and these breaches require the need to redress. And we have recognised for a long time that we need to have our own voice in this country. That's what the Uluru Statement is all about. It's Aboriginal people saying for themselves, we want treaty, we need it. And it's a way forward to bring about truth and reconciliation. Aboriginal people are still being denied their rights and their place in this society. I welcome the invitation given by Chris to name what the issues are for us to occupy this land together. First Peoples sovereignty is everybody's business. All tiers of government, federal, state and local, church and states, and Indigenous peoples' political structures, recognition of the denial of rights as set out under the UNDRIP, the acronym for United Nations for Rights for Indigenous Peoples, its charters and articles, to name and address the issues that still deny and discriminate against First Peoples. So most obviously, declaringly obvious, still we have no treaty, not hearing Aboriginal voice, the Uluru Statement. Warangoni, Warumatna Yirape in the Nunganga in the Ngawala. In a time long ago, our ancestors spoke these words. Wangangadna, Nanga Idla Widarapa Uwatamanga. They told the story of the Gumtree couple, how strong and tall they stood together. Warungoni Uwatamangadna, Van Bilochu Widarapa. In a time long ago, they stood together, husband and wife, the gum tree couple. Wirarapa Niringa, Madlapana Wiraipina Akananga. Around the gum tree couple, lots of young gum tree saplings grew. They grew well and tall and strong. Wanduwacha Ngalawatnangadna. They grew strong and well. Fa Umata Vachunga Miru Muda Yapa Yundangadna. Then one day, strange people came and cut a road where the gum tree couple stood. Ngainga, Wirarapa Yuatabanga, Vanbella Angunga. It is a deep sadness. It was where the gum tree couple had stood. It was their home. Ngainga. Akradangadna Wirarapa Angu. Yata Vaniangadna. Wenanga Vanbilla Yuatamanga. Ngainga. This story talks about how gum tree couples stood together, tall and strong. And the road that was cut in between them meant there was broken relationship. I see in this story a story of Australia, first and second peoples in Australia. Relationship broken and a road that divides. Where to now? Where will this road lead us to? It's a good opportunity actually for us to be able to sit and talk and listen together about where this road might lead us. Reconciliation is about relationship. And that's why this little story, an ancient story, is so important. Our stories are very important. They are for our teaching. Our old people taught us our stories. If we didn't listen, our story, we would. It was about life or death. If you didn't listen, it was about life or death. And we had to sit and listen to our stories, to our elders, and reconciliation too, I think, about righting the wrongs, about the right relationship, is very much about deep listening to the stories and hearing the other, the story of the other, and resisting the urge to, but our story is this. Listen deeply and have an open mind and see differently, as Bruce Pascoe invites us. Let us be challenged to see things differently, and maybe this road we might find reconciliation in being together. Thank you, Chris, for your words tonight. I always find them very, very challenging, and I'm always ready to hear those hard stories. I know as a First Nations person, we have to, the trauma of hearing those stories is just under the surface, and they come, anybody who knows a little bit about trauma knows that it's a trigger. It triggers emotions in us. And there was a time towards the end of my ministry, I started to say to my elders, Aunty, you don't have to tell your story. You know, we need to look after our old people, and I, am just thankful that Chris was one of my teachers, and I learnt a lot about and how to speak and how to challenge things and ask questions. And so I thank you, Chris, for being a good teacher to me as well. So I hope that you will be able to ask the hard questions. This is a safe place. Covenanting, we've got have our covenanting coordinator here, and covenanting for us in the Uniting Church is a safe space. And it's a safe space to be able to ask the hard questions, but it's also a space where we can actually listen to one another and hear what the other is saying to us. So I invite you to do that during the workshops and during the question times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aunty Denise, for your amazing ability just to put your finger on the issues and for us to sense your passion and your pain and your hope. It was a great gift to us. Thank you very much.